Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lissy Medvedow, Executive Director of the Rappaport Center for Law and Public Policy at Boston College Law School. Welcome. Usually, our programs focus on law and policy and feature lawmakers and legal practitioners, but COVID has changed everything. And among those most deeply affected by COVID are families and children. So today, the Rappaport Center presents a program designed to help families and kids deal with some of the difficulties being encountered on a daily basis and for time unknown. We are incredibly fortunate to have three extraordinary panelists this afternoon. Here's the plan. I will introduce Dr. Michael Jellinek. I'll introduce his two colleagues, and then I will turn the program over to Dr. Jellinek. We'll reserve time at the end to answer questions. Please use the chat or Q&A function for your questions. We'll try and get to as many as possible. You can see and hear us, but we cannot see or hear anyone, just so you all know that. And lastly, we are recording this program so that those who are unable to be with us will be able to access it at a later date. It would take me all day to fully outline the accomplishments of our three panelists, so I'll try and be incredibly brief. I'll start with Dr. Jellinek. Dr. Michael Jellinek is a child psychiatrist and served as Chief of Child Psychiatry at Mass General Hospital for 32 years. For more than a decade, he was president of Newton Wellesley Hospital. He is also a prolific author and with a colleague developed the most widely used brief screening instrument to help primary care pediatricians identify children with emotional problems. Notably, at least from my perspective, Dr. Jellinek is also a member of the Rappaport Center's advisory board. He suggested this webinar and graciously offered to moderate it. He's fantastic. Dr. Eugene Beresin is professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School and served as the director of child and adolescent psychiatry residency training program at McLean Hospital and MGH for 30 years. That's 3 decades. He is currently the executive director of the Clay Center for Young Healthy Minds, devoted to promoting the educational behavioral well-being of young people by providing innovative education about mental health for parents. He's also the director of an outreach program to meet the needs of underserved youth and families. Dr. Beresin has been honored with numerous awards, is widely published, and directs a 2-year mandatory course at Harvard Medical School on reflective practice and ethics for doctors. He also plays a role in the television world. He consults on ER, Law and Order, SVU, and on a variety of Emmy Award-winning children's shows. That's very cool. Dr. Anne Fishel is a PhD Associate Professor of Psychology at Harvard Medical School. She's a family therapist, clinical psychologist, and director of the Family and Couple Therapy program at MGH, where she has won multiple awards for her teaching to child psychiatry residents and psychology interns. She's also the executive director and co-founder of the Family Dinner Project, a nonprofit helping families online and in communities have more and better family dinners. She's a frequent lecturer and author as well. We couldn't be in better hands than with these three esteemed professionals. I'm very grateful to all of you. I'm now happily turning this over to Dr. Jellinek. Go for it.
Thank you very much, Lissy, and thank you for the kind introductions. Let's get right to the questions because we want to save as much time at the end as we can. The questions were distributed with the announcement for this program, and we're going to stick to those that were in that announcement. Let's start with Jean. How do I talk to my children of different ages, toddler, school age, teenager, about COVID and about the pandemic?
Thanks, Mike. So first of all kids have 3 questions, whether they're a toddler, school age, or adolescent child, and that is, am I safe? Are you the people taking care of me safe? And how is this going to affect my daily life? And all kids are affected by parental anxiety. So we'll talk about that in a bit. Um, the most important thing for kids of all ages is to ask what they know, because don't assume that you know what they've heard. Now, this is not true for toddlers, but for school-age kids and adolescents, we want to know what they know about Corona, what their worries are, what their fears are, how they got their information. And I would validate their concerns. I would let them know that you're available, and I would provide reassurance. Now, that being said, that's true for all kids, but how do you approach kids at different ages? So toddlers really respond more to the emotions of the parent than to anything else. They don't really understand explanations about illness. So what they're going to need is a bit more cuddling, a bit more TLC, and a bit more time with parents. School-age kids are able to understand the basic functions of disease and what happens, but they're very concrete. They want to know about routines. They want to know about schedules. They want to know, very basic questions about what's going to happen first, second, and third. So for them, I would ask them if they have any questions. And remember, the school-age kids work things out by playing. So let them play about these activities, and turn off the media for school-age kids and for toddlers, because it's too much information. Just turn it off. Now, adolescents, on the other hand, they're more able to understand more complex things. They understand nuances. They're listening to digital media a lot. And for them, I would actually use the media to sit with them and ask them questions as you watch things together, so that you can kind of communicate with them about what their concerns are, about how they're worried, what they're worried about their future, about what they're missing, about events they're missing, and friends, and events like sporting events. So for them, it's a real time to bond with them around discussions and conversations, and help them make contributions to the family. They can really contribute a lot as teenagers, and Annie will talk about this, I'm sure, with the Family Dinner Project. So there are different ways of managing kids of different ages.
Annie, what are the best practices for families and couples to mitigate the impact of the quarantine and also promote resiliency?
Thank you for that question. I'd like to take them one at a time, talk about best practices for families and then for couples, although of course there'll be some overlap. It's a fascinating time to be a family therapist. We've sort of turned back the clock. It's almost like we're 100 years back, when kids were spending so much time with their parents. And I think some kids are a lot happier being around their parents, some not at all. But I think the two foundational pillars to remember are routines and rituals. So routines are what give us order and structure. They make sure that our days don't turn from day to night. They make sure that we get all the things done that we need to, like time to be alone, time to do our work, time for leisure, time to listen to music. And we can collaborate with our kids about how to set up a routine. And in that way, really highlight what our values are as a family and what our kids' values are about how they want to spend time. So routine gives order, it sets boundaries between the couple's life, between work and family. And so that's one foundation. And then the other is the importance of ritual, which I think has never been more important than it is during the pandemic. Because rituals really give meaning. They tell us who we are as a family. I think of the ritual that sort of emerged organically in New York, probably borrowed from Italy, where everyone goes out at 7 o'clock at night and bangs pots and pans and shouts their thanks to hospital workers and grocery workers. That's a large-scale ritual. But we have family mealtime as a family ritual that can really be embraced and reinvigorated during this time. I co-founded the Family Dinner Project 10 years ago, knowing that 95% of families thought that dinner was a great idea, but only 40% were actually having family dinner. And now the pandemic has kind of done what the Family Dinner Project couldn't do alone. Now 100% almost of families are having family dinner. And it's, you know, been proven with dozens of studies to be great for the nutrition, the health, the mental health of families, and even cognitive and functioning and academic success. And I think adults as well as kids really rely on rituals to make meaning out of life and to give a sense of security and to give it an anchor. And I think now how family dinner may be a little different during the pandemic. We can't eat all the foods we want. We have to rely on pantry staples. This may be a time to invite our kids more into the kitchen to help out. It makes them feel that they have a little more control if they're contributing to the family. It can be an empowering kind of thing. And we can't rely on the same kind of questions that we used to ask. You can't very much ask, how is your day today? You know, when you've been spending the whole day with each other and you know darn well how the day was. And so this may be a time to reinvent. It may be a time to watch a movie, have dinner and a movie. Perhaps you watch films that might resonate, Castaway or The Martian or Where the Wild Things Are, movies that evoke being separated from the rest of the world. Or you play games, because food and mealtime is to families what Legos are to young kids, what music is to teenagers. It's a form of play and fun. And so there are games that we can play at the table. Maybe a rose, thorn, and bud, you know, something positive, something negative, something you hope will happen tomorrow. Or my pandemic version, a cactus and a bud. You know, what are the difficult things of being in this pandemic, and what are you most looking forward to when we can go back to life sort of as it was? Maybe we tell stories about other family members who've been through wars or depression or AIDS as a way to learn from that and to bring in new material. So anyway, the important.
And what you're suggesting in a way is that one of the, I hate to even think of it, one of the positives from this whole experience is a kind of opportunity for families to reinvent themselves and not necessarily keep everything the way it was or everything the way it is now, but kind of mix things that might make family life more positive long-term than we were used to when we were going flat out before the COVID.
Yes, I think at a very simple level, that's true. I think families, not that that's a simple idea, I don't mean to suggest that, but families who maybe wanted to have family dinner but couldn't quite figure out how to do it are now having it and realizing it's not just a chore, it actually feels good to make that time. And so they may want to continue that, as well as families who were having family dinner and maybe got into a rut with it, now have had to come up with some new ways of doing it because the old ways don't quite fit this moment.
A lot of families, Jean, have a rhythm where the kids go off for summer camps and so on. We don't know how many camps are actually going to open or how many summer activities are going to happen. It looks like there are going to be some and they'd be shortened. But that's another jolt in terms of a change in expectations. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, you know, one thing that's very seminal and important about this era is that it's really a time of loss and grief. I mean, many kids are missing out on all kinds of things that they would typically look forward to. I mean, during the school year, you know, I've never heard so many kids saying, I wish I were in school. They miss the time with each other. They're missing concerts. They're missing hanging out. They're missing going to movies. They're missing, well, and important events like graduation and sporting events. Imagine seniors in high school who are graduating, who are on a team and can't play in their sports. So there's a lot of and summer jobs and internships, working at a camp, or even going to camp. So it's a real big time of loss for many kids. And we have to help them cope with that because it's not clear what's going to happen this summer. So I think it's very important for parents to be talking with their kids, to help them consider other options, to consider other things that might be useful or important to them, to connect with other kids. I mean, we certainly have been always talking about limiting screen time, and I know, Mike, you might be talking about screen time, but this is the time when screen time actually is very, very helpful. And kids can hang out together. They can have virtual parties together. They can actually create playlists together. They can express themselves through creative arts. Kids can do poems. They can write songs together. They can study musical instruments. There are lots and lots of things that they can do that they otherwise wouldn't be doing. And it really takes conversations between parents and kids and other family members to consider what can be done. In my family, for example, one of the things we've done is we created a Spotify playlist. So everybody kind of made contributions and then they added songs. They said, whoa, where'd you get that one? And you know, who was that? Who was that? So, you know, we have to be thoughtful and creative, but we also have to be sensitive to the fact that it is a major time of loss, and let the kids express their sadness and upset. And I think parents need to express their own sadness and upset. I mean, this is a time when we would typically go on vacations together, when we would spend time together, when we would get out and meet with relatives, with grandparents, with all sorts of people that we just can't do. So we have to be thoughtful and creative about the alternatives and just let everybody participate and make suggestions, keep an open ear, listen, we just have to kind of find ways of coping.
Mm.
You know, all of us have mentioned and been concerned about anxiety. The same as the kids have experienced loss. A lot of parents don't have their same routines. They miss the people that they go to see at work. And although virtual is pretty good, it isn't the same as being in the room with someone. There's concern about the future, certainly about the job loss as a major problem. Any thoughts about dealing with anxiety and also then children's anxiety? Gene?
Yes, so thanks. That's a really important one. First of all, parents are best able to help their kids when they control their own anxiety. I mean, research from all over the world has shown that in crisis situations of various kinds, whether it was 9/11 or all sorts of events, hurricanes, mudslides, you name it, when parents control their anxiety, the kids do better. So there are lots of ways that parents can do this. First of all, get information about COVID, but not too much. Don't flood yourself. Carve out time for yourself. I mean, parents are really stressed. They're working remotely. They're taking care of sanitation. They're trying to homeschool their kids. They're overwhelmed with their own questions or anxiety about themselves or their parents, if their parents are alive. So self-care is very important. So using meditation, yoga, exercise, be aware of diet and sleep habits. Taking care of yourself is really important. You know, it's kind of like when you're on the airplane and the attendant says, put the oxygen mask on yourself first and then help the person next to you. We can't help our kids or our families unless we take care of our own anxieties. And everybody has a different way of doing it, whether it's watching a series on cable TV or listening to music or just taking a walk, wearing a mask, and physically distancing yourself from others, which is good role modeling, by the way. But whatever works for you is what you should be doing to alleviate your anxiety. And certainly talking with other people, your own supports in your spiritual communities, among your friends, with partners, with family members, is extraordinarily helpful. I mean, human beings are pack animals. You know, we are social creatures. We live with each other and for each other. And it's very, very reassuring and helpful to alleviate anxiety by staying in touch with others that we love and that we care about.
And if kids see their parents doing those things and also actually being less anxious, that's going to have a major impact on their own anxiety.
You bet. I mean, self-care for kids is really important. And in fact, it's something that once if they learn early enough, it's incredibly helpful. The Clay Center's come up with a number of self-help short videos for middle school, high school, and college students. And whatever kids can do, whether it's playing an instrument, meditating, journaling, playing with slime, building with Legos. I mean, whatever it is, they need to know what works for them. And for some kids, meditation is just terrific. And for other kids, it's like, they say to me, I can't do that. I can't concentrate for that long. Okay, well, what can you do? You can put the headphones on, you can listen to some music, but kids need to learn self-care and ways of alleviating anxiety. And a very important way for them too is to stay connected with peers and commiserate and talk with them, get advice and share their experiences. Another thing for kids, as with parents, is use of creative arts. There's nothing better than journaling or playing an instrument or singing, dancing, taking yoga lessons on Zoom, you name it. I mean, it's very effective.
Gene, we're gonna, and Ann, we're gonna have to hold our answers a little tighter if we're gonna have time for questions. So let's just be a little briefer. Ann?
Oh, could I just piggyback and just add a couple of thoughts to that?
Of course.
It's so important. One thing is sort of cutting each other more slack during this time, not expect, we're all making this up as we go. There's no playbook. So being kind of kinder and easier with one another. And then I looked at couples who have been retired and older couples as a kind of model for how to handle being stuck at home with your partner, because I was noticing in my practice and maybe in my own life, getting short with that there was a lot of shorter fuses and anger and so on. And when I looked at these older retired couples, who by the way, are the happiest of any cohort over the life cycle, they have fewer fights because they get kind of bored with the fights they've had. And I think we can do that no matter what age. We know how that fight about the trash is going to go. Let's just move on to something else. Or if you're going to have a fight, make sure you don't say contemptuous, belligerent, blaming things to one another.
So in the spirit of acceleration, I'm going to take the next three questions and try to do them a little more briefly. Is there any harm with screen time? Well, as Jean mentioned, right now screen time is actually terrific. The question asks the different types of screen time. Some is with friends, a lot of it is with schoolwork. Some of it may be with entertainment or music, and some may be video games. I want to say that at extremes, especially during normal times, too much screen time is a problem. And if you have somebody who's not being able to complete their tasks of school and activities and friends or family, then if that screen time interferes with that, it would be worrisome. Right now, as Ann suggests, I'd go pretty easy on those requirements. And unless somebody were really isolated and overwhelmed with the screen time, I don't think there's any harm. People are worried about violent versus non-violent video games. I must say the research on this is pretty thin. And one thing that gives me some comfort is that over the 20 years of the most violent video games, in fact, violent crime has gone down in the United States more dramatically than any other time in history. So if there was a correlation between violent video games and future violence, I don't think we've seen it. The best correlation for future violence is child abuse. And physically hurting children or neglecting children seems to cause much more in terms of future violence in the family or in society than actually a video game. If my child has special needs and I'm worried about them losing ground, what can I do? A lot of parents, I think, don't fully understand their child's special needs. There are many ways of helping children with special educational needs. And I guess I would reread the child's testing. I might call the school teacher, special ed teacher, and get some advice. And then within the limits of what I'm able to do, customize some things that might make it a little bit easier for the child and to support them. This is really a serious problem. I'm not trying to make light of it, but the best you can probably do is try to understand the disability and then support the child through it, especially if there's not a special ed teacher involved in the homeschooling. Last quickie I'll do is my 13-year-old is doing nothing in terms of school, no matter how hard I push. What can I do? Well, the first thing to do is remember that 13-year-olds are designed not to listen to you because they're trying to develop their own identity and separate from the family to get ready for high school and college. So they often don't have the best judgment because of their developing brain, and they often are trying to do things on their own in their own way. Sometimes I've seen families push too hard, and the reaction for those children is to push back that hard and not do anything. And one of the best ways to drive parents crazy is to do nothing. So I might step back from that, try to share sort of a vision of what the child wants to accomplish in their own life, tell them the pros and cons, the consequences, try to use it to build trust rather than just driving through their resistance and making them 9-year-olds again. Because 13-year-olds aren't supposed to become 9-year-olds again, they're supposed to become 15-year-olds. And I think recognizing that sometimes takes the pressure off those kinds of conversations. Ann, did I get that right?
Yeah.
Good. Whenever I say family, I double check with Ann. Balancing work and childcare. Work is overwhelming, and sometimes the kids are also very demanding, and that's part of the pressure that families are under. Ann, you want to give some advice, and maybe Jean, you want to comment on that one? It's an important one.
Yeah, I think this has really been one of the great challenges of the pandemic. The office is now at the kitchen table. School is now also at the kitchen table. You know, there's balance is kind of impossible, I would say. And I think that people who have been used to working 12 hours a day can no longer do that. And so in some ways, there's been a little bit more balance added. That might be another silver lining of the pandemic, that people aren't able to work quite as much. They're being reoriented back to the family. I think having that routine, having the schedule so that the family members agree there's going to be time for shared meal time, there's going to be time for exercise, there's going to be time for schoolwork, there's going to be time to play alone, to play with siblings. All of those things can be sort of mapped out and then imperfectly followed from day to day. I think there are other kinds of balances that we might also want to think about. The balance between having fun and creating some lightness, as well as making time to talk about how difficult this is for all of us and all the losses that Jean was talking about earlier. So that is, I think, another kind of balance, talking about how we feel and sometimes forgetting about how we feel in order to focus on other things. I think that's another kind of being in balance. I think of Tom Stoppard, the British playwright, who said, happiness is equilibrium, adjust your weight. I keep thinking about that every day. I'm having to adjust my weight.
Jean, do you have any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, well, Anne always captures most everything. So, but one of the other things I might consider, depending on, especially for teenagers, let the kids join in the negotiation about the balance. Let them come up with ideas and take initiative. Let them feel empowered. I mean, if they can feel that they have a voice, it's really important. Teenagers especially, imagine, you're trying to separate from the family, you're trying to find out who you are, and here you are stuck at home. I mean, so if a teenager wants to have a certain time apart from other people, alone, in a separate room with their friends, I've talked with a number of families during this period of time where they actually rearrange rooms, where a kid will say, you know, I just have no privacy. And there are families that live in very close quarters and they have to actually share space. So be attentive to the needs of each of the family members as they're all, you know, trying to balance work and fun and time alone, and help them all develop a plan that works out for everybody.
And Gene, you mentioned to me that sometimes kids can make real contributions in a family and gain some self-esteem and some stature if they're actually maybe helping the parents do some work, or helping with the child care, or tutoring their younger sibling,
Yes.
and sort of bring them in as part of the team, as opposed to seeing them as having to be only cared for.
Yeah, you know, what we found out in other tragedies, for example, after 9/11, one of the most important things that helped children as well as adults was making contributions, you know, making cards, lighting candles, doing things online, writing poems, making a contribution, giving. It's interesting, we respond emotionally better to giving than receiving. And for kids of all ages to feel that they're making a contribution within the family, but also to the community. I mean, there are many groups that are meeting online. There are many kids that can join together and say, let's do something for our spiritual community. Let's do something for our school community. Let's do something for our field hockey team that never got to play this season, and what can we do for them, you know? So those kinds of contributions help kids feel connected and make a difference, and that's really important.
One of the major concerns, really beyond an individual family, is the vast inequities that we've seen during the pandemic. And let me start by saying that the pandemic has highlighted, has demonstrated the inequities. It might be in educational opportunities. The difference, I heard Rachel Rollins comment on this, the difference between one child who's in private school and one child who's in a public school. Having access to the internet. I heard one statistic that almost a fifth of inner city kids don't have access to the internet. And of course, the equipment for the internet, you know, a computer and so forth. It must be devastating for a family that's trying to get out of poverty and make a difference for themselves, to then meet barrier after barrier. The same as I hope families have some chance to rebalance or reconsider their values and commitments with time after the COVID, because the COVID experience maybe opened up some doors that had been closed. It would be wonderful, a benefit, if society could look at what's happened because of COVID in terms of disparities, and make internet available to everybody, that every child has access, owns a laptop or some kind of a computing device, access to healthcare. This has really made it so crystal clear. We've been blinded to it in the past, and I bet we're going to be blinded to it in the future, but I have some optimism that maybe this will force some changes in the right direction on the poverty side, as well as on other sides of society. Gene, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I do, and I appreciate that comment. People of color have been hit so much harder in terms of illness, but also in terms of just healthcare disparities. So there's two levels that I look at it. One is at the level of public policy and equitable distribution of funds. And I think that we can all learn something from this horrible experience. And that is that we really do need to redistribute the means to the internet, homeschooling. I mean, so what about the families whose parents don't speak English? How do they get help? I mean, it's one thing to be able to, or whose parents haven't graduated high school, who don't know the material. I think that we need to be able to supply those families with the means for homeschooling and for for different language interpretations. One of the things, for example, that was just so wonderful, the Clay Center wanted to translate our blog about how to support your kids through the coronavirus pandemic into Spanish. Within a few days, we had a Spanish translation from one of our community health centers at Mass General. Then we decided, well, maybe these parents that do have access to internet would like to read some of the blogs that we have about basic psychiatric problems, attention deficit disorder, anxiety, depression. And literally within 2 weeks, we had 10 blogs translated into Spanish, and we had child and adolescent psychiatrists reviewing them for accuracy. What impresses me is that if so many people are grateful for the ability to help and contribute, and understanding the needs, for example, of the Latino population in Chelsea that's been hit terribly hard, this has been a great gift. And I think that we need to be aware of those who are in most need, and get together and initiate projects that can really help them.
Andy, are there any family resources that sometimes can help? Have you seen things in terms of grandparents or sharing resources that might make a difference?
Well, I mean, I was thinking also kind of in a different vein about looking at the research coming out of China about spikes in mental health disorders after COVID, and just thinking that we're going to have to up our game in terms of offering mental health resources, whether it's telehealth, which has turned out to be really widely accepted at our own institutions, but also among families and couples and individuals. So that makes me a little more hopeful that there's going to be greater access to mental health services as we can use telehealth. I think there are all kinds of resources online. There's the mental health guide that MGH put out. There are all kinds of resources at the Clay Center and the Family Dinner Project that can help with getting through the pandemic. So those would be some places that I would start.
Looking ahead, what do you see happening, hopefully in September, but maybe it'll be later, in terms of going back, of returning to school and work? What are some of the issues that might come up with the transition back?
Yeah, I think of course, it's hard to know, but if we look at other big systemic events and learn from that, I think for some kids and families, there'll be what's called post-traumatic growth, that many of us will bounce back quickly and may even show growth in certain areas. We may value our relationships more, or discover personal strengths we didn't know we had, or have spiritual awakenings. I think many people will experience mental health issues, some of which people will bounce back from after a period of time. I think kids who have ACEs, who already experience adverse childhood experiences, may have the toughest time at all. And I'm thinking about kids who already had experiences with abuse and neglect, and witnessing violence, and experiencing poverty and homelessness. I think that this experience of being cut off and losing time at school and not having access to healthcare and all the rest is going to affect these kids and families the most profoundly and dramatically. And these are the families and kids that, as mental health professionals, we really need to reach out to and plan for when things go back to some kind of normalcy.
So in some ways, this is a double whammy already for those children who have stressors in their life, such as poverty or a chronic illness or abuse, neglect, housing, lack of access to the internet. They're now, their problems are really likely to be compounded by COVID, while hopefully at least some middle-class kids who've had more resources, more options, more routines that they can adapt to, maybe having a tutor or other people around to help them and so forth, they may not lose that much. And this is going to put the kids who have been disadvantaged in the past even more so.
Yes, I think that's right. And I think when I think about couples and families, there's certainly way more intimate partner violence during the pandemic. I think there's going to be a spike in divorce, certainly a spike in couples wanting to separate, maybe not forever, but I think that this is really shaking up a lot of couples' relationships.
So one of the things that a family might do is step back and say, where can I do post-traumatic growth, which I think is a great term, and where do I have post-traumatic stress that I have to attend to?
Yeah, that's well put.
Gina, any thoughts on coming back?
Well, first of all, I don't think we're going to be coming back in the fall. I think there's going to be a second surge combined with influenza, and I think people should be preparing not to have a first semester back. If we're lucky and things go well, great. But I think this is a marathon, not a sprint, and I think we should plan on being at home. I think one thing that schools can provide, this is a request, is that especially underserved kids, they need more attention, more homeschooling, and the classroom time right now is about 3 to 3.5 hours a day. Teachers are adapting in various ways. And are under a lot of pressure. But I think that if we allocate resources to help the kids who are struggling and identify the kids who are struggling and prioritize those kids who don't have parents who can help them, I think that should be a priority for all schools, public and private.
We only have a couple minutes left before we're going to open up to questions. Can you just repeat or clarify any resources that parents or others can go to online that may be helpful to them? Gene, why don't you start with the Clay Center?
Well, the Clay Center, we've got almost 400 blogs and podcasts that can be obtained on virtually any place, Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, you name it, and videos. There is a YouTube channel, MGH Clay Center. So the Clay Center is one resource, and that's mghclaycenter.org. That's one resource. Annie's Family Dinner Project is a great resource. Online, Common Sense Media is extremely good. Sesame Street has some very good material. I think everybody needs to be aware that when you go online and you Google a resource, you've got to be sure that it's a trusted resource. So the question is, how do you know if it's trusted or not? And that you can learn from other people, from your primary care physicians, from professionals, from psychologists and psychiatrists, of what material is good and what material is sketchy.
So I can certify the ones mentioned today: the Clay Center, Anne's Family Dinner Project, and Sesame Street are pretty reliable. So we've gone through the list of our proposed questions and done that in 45 minutes, which is a great work. Let's see, any questions come in?
Yes, I have one. How do I push my child to do schoolwork when she is crying about it? And how much do I back off to preserve her mental health? Here's a little background. She's in 6th grade and all of a sudden on a computer more than ever, seems to be mentally and physically suffering. And this parent was saying, sort of FYI, that in Newton, Massachusetts, there's 20 minutes of class 2 days a week with no real instruction, just social interaction. This is, again, 6th grade. So basically, how much do you push a kid?
So I'll start this one. School systems have a wide variety of responses to this. Some have been very creative and have made the work very interesting. Some have kind of dotted the I's and crossed the T's by providing a lot of homework that is busy work and not that exciting. So a lot depends on the quality of the virtual teaching, and I think we're going to have a long way to go, and I expect pretty significant improvements in this over time. A lot of schools were caught off guard and weren't really prepared. There have been union issues of how much time teachers should spend and how prepared they are to suddenly go virtual after being trained to be classroom teachers. So there's a lot of work to be done in this area. Also, kids are different. Some have great attention spans on a screen and some don't. You've got to appreciate what your child is capable of. If the child's under a lot of stress, you've got to make a judgment as to what is a reasonable expectation. If there's a lot of busy work and a lot of homework that doesn't make sense to you and is stressful to the child, you've got to, if possible, get in contact with the teacher and talk to other parents and raise some questions about that. So I think this is very individual, both by school district and by how the children are responding to this kind of learning. I don't know, Jean or Ann, do you have any thoughts?
I would just add this perspective, that there's a lot of learning that's taking place that's unprecedented and that could serve a child well for the rest of their life. How to deal with boredom, how to learn to play with an annoying sibling, how to help out in ways that you hadn't before, how to talk about movies with your parents. So I think that some of that other kind of learning really needs to be valued as well and considered in the sort of the larger picture. Maybe there's not as much academic learning, traditional learning going on, but maybe there's a lot of other learning that's going to be really important.
Also with a 6th grader, you're dealing with someone who can learn from the internet, following their own interests. And can read books and discuss those books with the parents. So age, let's say 12 or so, is often a good time to transition from everything being taught to following your own wishes and interests, mm-hmm. and pursuing those, which can be as academically educational as whatever the school is presenting.
I have another question. Could you help focus or help think about what do families do now that summer vacation will probably look differently than many families had envisioned? And these are for the lucky families who could have a vacation.
Right, and who have options. In one circumstance I know of, the parents have gotten together and allowed 4 young teenage girls, women, to follow the rules of quarantine, but to be together. So they created a contract for a bubble. And this bubble includes these 4 families and especially these 4 kids. And probably the risk to spreading COVID if you create that kind of bubble is pretty low. In fact, some summer camps are talking about creating a 1-month or 5-week bubble where everybody goes into the bubble, no trips, counselors can't leave the grounds, and they create a 5-week bubble to have a joint experience that's safe. There may be opportunities locally for those kinds of bubble activities either within the family or among a group of families to try to make the summer a little more bearable and different than what the winter has been. But Ann, Jean, any comments?
Well, I think we have to be creative. I mean, for those families that typically go away for vacation, I love the idea of that bubble, but it may be that having physical distancing, if you're fortunate enough to have a yard, or to have a park nearby. I mean, I live outside of town. I mean, I know people that take a walk around Walden Pond separately. So, you know, you're walking, but still, you know, doing outside activities, not going away to a vacation spot, but in the context of one's own neighborhood, of an arboretum, of a place where people can be physically distant and yet enjoy nature together, or a cookout, but separately. It's different. I mean, everybody has to realize that this summer, excuse the pun, is not going to be a picnic. I mean, it's tough. I mean, these are tough times, and you know, I don't mean. I think that we can look upon it in a positive way. We can relate to what we take for granted. That we take for granted the barbecues where we're sharing things and we're eating at the same table together. We can take for granted that we can give each other a hug when we say hello. And now we have to kind of not do that, but realize that it's in the safety of our families and of our friends and of our entire community. And I think turning what seems to be a hardship or a deprivation into something as a learning experience is what we're going to have to do.
Annie, any thought?
Yeah, well, the Family Dinner Project is putting together some pandemic summer resources that will be something to do every Friday night that's sort of outside the box, and also a daytime activity that includes fun and conversation and food. And beyond that, I also think about asking your kids what they would be doing at camp and seeing if any of that can be replicated online. So, you know, taking an origami class or a photography class or sign language. So not doing anything academic, but seeing if there's some things that you could do that have to do with the arts or music, and maybe doing it with a friend or with a couple of friends. So you take the class together and chat about it afterwards. And then I also think about opportunities for work or for contributing to the family or to the community. And that might be, if you're a suburban kid, mowing lawns or doing outside work, or making dinner that then you can deliver to other families in the neighborhood. So that would be another kind of avenue. But Jean's absolutely right. It's not going to be great summers probably for most of us. It's really going to be hard. It tends to be a time we kind of relax, and it's a change from what we've been doing, but it's going to be more of what we're doing, but with less support from schools.
A little less fun.
A little less fun, yeah.
Lissy, any others?
A person has asked, are there any specific individual or group family ideas that you have, examples that you found already? I think this is referring to summer activities, summer fun.
So one family I know is a parent and a child are beginning to jog together and do a little more sports stuff in the backyard. Another family that I worked with is doing a project in the backyard, which are more involved with construction. And this younger teenager and parent are building in the backyard, something which they probably would have never done under the normal routines of work and going away to camp. So those are two examples that I've seen in my circle.
Gardening. I mean, you can be physically distant. You can grow your own food. You don't have to order from. You don't have to go to the supermarket and risk being infected. Gardening can be a wonderful addition to that.
And you're speaking from personal experience, right, Jean?
Yes.
Backyard camping, if you don't want to take a road trip. Maybe doing a virtual Iron Chef where you connect with some other families or individuals, and each family proposes an ingredient, and then everybody has to make dinner in their own house using those 3 ingredients, seeing what everybody comes up with.
Someone wrote in to create an obstacle course in your backyard with items perhaps from your garage.
That's a great one.
And also picking your battles. The same person wrote in to pick your battles wisely with your young folks.
That's a great comment.
Yes.
Yep. And that goes with, the whole notion of giving each other some slack, and having reasonable expectations for everybody under a time of, I think, stress, and as Jean mentioned, a time of loss. All of us are going to be giving up things in order to keep each other safe. And loss is one of the hardest things for people to adapt to. It's stressful. It takes real work to accept the loss, to grieve it, and not let it hurt you in long-term ways that are destructive to people or yourself. So this is, as Jean said, not an easy time. Even for us, those of us who are fortunate, much less for those of us who are already stressed by other issues such as having lost your job or living in a dangerous neighborhood. It's almost unimaginable having this stress piled on top of that one.
Yeah. Well, I remember my mom grew up in the Depression, and I always wondered why she was conserving paper or saving this and saving that and using portions. And what we're learning now is that we have to get by with less, and we can be creative, and we can make good, and we can learn from this. I think the trick is to turn what's really negative, and we can't deny that it's negative, into something that can be a learning experience that we can take with us into the future.
As we approach the end, I think Annie's post-traumatic growth.
I didn't make that up. It's a thing in the literature.
Well, I'm behind. I'm not as up to date on post-traumatic growth. I'm so used to post-traumatic stress as a psychiatrist. But post-traumatic growth recognizes that it's traumatic, but that there's an opportunity to grow from it. So I really like that. That may be the highlight term for what we've been talking about today.
Yeah.
Well, I think that the 3 of you have given us enormous information and wealth of knowledge and insight. I think maybe the lesson learned is really to take what we've been given and truly turn these challenges into opportunities for, as you've said, for learning, for creativity, for family and community, and to create connections. I mean, I do think that we have things to worry about in our future with the inequities, and for the kids who are missing so much learning in schools and teacher time and having to make up some of these learning and opportunity gaps that will inevitably happen over these several months. And for families and who don't have the luxury of having the family dinner table, I worry about those families deeply. But I think you've given us so much to think about and for some of us to be grateful about, frankly. So I appreciate your being with us. Thank you for sharing so much of yourselves with us and your accomplishments. As I said, I could have spent all day just reading your long bios and tried to consolidate. So thank you to everyone. Thank you to the 3 of you. For the community out there, Our next webinar is scheduled for June 16th. It will be on the public health response to COVID. We have amazing panelists for that as well. I look forward to seeing people then, seeing you actually, maybe reading chats from you. Anyway, thank you so much, everybody. Stay well, be safe.
Bye-bye, thank you.
Thank you.